welcome. It's another Confessions podcast brought to you from Radio 2 and specifically Drive Time, 5 till 7, Monday to Friday. This week's creative collection, it's a terrible parade of sins for you this week. Roger the Dodger's Rabbit Resurrection, a rowdy run of with no tassels. It'll all become clear. Stop looking like that. A helter-skelter of hairy hamsters and a piscatorial pool perforation. Will you forgive any of them? It's unlikely. Here it all comes. This is another Drive Time confession from Guy. Oh. Hello, Guy.
Hello.
That was like a rhetorical thing. You weren't expected to join in.
No, but I think, people do. People do. I bet lots of people would have gone, hello, at that point.
Only if they're called Guy, maybe. Anyway, back off, Deadly. Confessions at bbc.co.uk. That's how we got this from Guy. Dear Father Simon, and the extremely forgiving all to boys and all to girls.
Oh.
I seek forgiveness for something that happened to me when I was looking after the next door's neighbour's dog for 2 days in the summer of 1998. Mark was a lovely guy, and as neighbours we got on exceptionally well for many years, often having a beer over the garden fence, which seems like a slightly odd thing to do. And generally...
No, it's not.
So judgmental.
Do you not talk to your neighbours?
Yes, but you don't have a
beer outside?
Yes, but you don't have a beer over the fence. Come round and have a beer.
Oh, no.
But no, maybe they don't want to come round.
No, don't have that happening.
How can you
I'm
have
not
a
going
beer?
round to the Mayos, they're saying.
Don't have a beer over the fence.
The fence is near enough.
Does someone supply both beers, or do you just both bring a beer out at the same time?
Take a beer out, yes.
We might as well just go round to someone's house.
Oh, no.
I get the feeling this is probably a sidetrack. Yeah.
Oh.
Anyway, we share a beer over the garden fence and generally looking out for each other's houses if either of us were away, and our children always played happily together. Well, Mark went away and he gave me the house key and asked me to water the plants, which is another confession, and take Roger the dog out for a walk twice a day. Roger the dog, yeah.
Roger!
Let him run around the garden and feed him his special meals that they'd prepared, and that's another confession. Well, I had taken Roger out for his walk on the first day and put him in Mark's garden to have a little run around. I returned a few hours later to feed Roger. However, on returning to the garden, I noticed something lying on the lawn.
Oh, no.
On closer perusal, I realised it was a white rabbit. And you could say, Father Simon, it wasn't particularly hopping around anymore.
Okay. Noted.
I could not understand where this rabbit had come from, so I started to look around Mark's garden, and to my surprise, behind the greenhouse, I found a rabbit hutch with a door slightly ajar. Oh, my goodness me, mercy, mercy me, and heavens above, I exclaimed. The rabbit has got out of the hutch, a rabbit I didn't know Mark had, and Roger the dog had found it and looked upon it as his brand new cuddly toy. A cuddly toy that hadn't wanted to play. Sweating profusely and feeling very concerned, I decided to bury the rabbit in the garden and went to the local pet shop to buy a similar bunny with pink ears, surprisingly not that difficult as all the bunnies looked the same. I carefully brought it home and placed it in the hutch with some fresh straw, a few carrots and some lovely raisins. Do rabbits eat raisins?
I don't think they were raisins.
Oh, OK. At this point, I decided I would keep Roger away from the garden the next day, as quite frankly, rabbits aren't that cheap, and I didn't want to go through the whole scenario all over again on the day that Mark was returning with his wife and children from their 2-day break. So the day arrived, and I'm feeling nervous, and I see Mark arrive in the drive next door, and I wandered out the front door and handed him his key. Everything all right, said Mike. He's from Cardiff, by the way.
Oh, good. Here we go. Brilliant. Looking forward to this.
Everything all right, said Mike. Yes, fine, no problems.
Doesn't sound very Welsh.
It's fine, no problems. All the plants are watered and Roger's in the house waiting for you, I said. Was Roger good for you, said Mark. Oh, yes, no worries. He's been running around the garden, looking very happy while you've been away. He's not eaten much, though. Well, thank you, said Mark. Let's get unpacked and we'll catch up over the fence. Have a beer. I've got a little something for you for looking after Roger. Oh. Well, an hour went by. I was in my garden watering the plants when I suddenly hear an awful lot of screaming from next door. Mark's children were crying, Mark's children were shouting, Mark's wife was shouting, oh my goodness, and things like that, and I don't believe it, and things like that. And at this point I'm thinking, well, Roger's probably dug up the rabbit, and I quietly walk back into my house, and then I hear the shout from over the fence. Guy! Oh. Well, I can't ignore it because he's clocked me and he's shouting at me. So I go over to the fence, and Mark was looking at me in a rather strange way. And I thought, well, this is it, the moment he confronts me about the buried bunny. But instead, he just kept staring at me in a strange way and saying he couldn't believe what had happened and it must have been a miracle. Well, I was at a loss. What Mark was talking about, I had no idea. And after he'd repeated it all over about 4 times, it's a miracle. He said, just before he went on holiday, that Bella the bunny had died.
Oh, no.
And he had buried it. He'd buried it in the garden. He got back and it looked like the soil in the ground had been disturbed. And Bella had come back to life.
A miracle!
And she was now sitting in the hutch eating a carrot. It's a resurrected bunny. I wasn't quite sure what to say at this point. I was, however, thinking, please don't let Roger dig up the original Bella or we're all for the high jump. I suggested that rabbits are sometimes stunned.
Oh, yes!
You stunned him. And then maybe he woke up again.
And then found his way back into his hut.
Yeah.
Anyway, I seek forgiveness for... When he left the door open.
Ah, true. And she locked it.
I seek forgiveness for scaring Mark's children as they had buried Bella only a few days before they went away. And whilst they were really happy that Bella was now alive again, I think they grew up thinking that rabbits were somehow special and different
Hilarious.
from all other animals. I seek forgiveness for allowing Mark's wife to believe that miracles really do happen. And finally, forgiveness for accepting the rather large bottle of malt whiskey for looking
Over the fence.
after Roger. From Mark. Well, it's one of those tales, and there's a sitcom waiting to be done here. Guy would like forgiveness. Let's see what happens. Sister Rebecca.
It's a funny one, isn't it? 'Cause the kids probably weren't expected to know, but Mark should have known that something was up. That's ridiculous. When you just think, oh, I know what happened. He must have thought the rabbit was killed by the dog and then he bought a new one. Anyway, it wasn't Guy's fault that the rabbit was eaten or... It wasn't Guy's fault.
What, in the first place?
No, it wasn't Guy's fault that the rabbit was mauled by the dog. So he wasn't anything to do with the rabbit's death.
No.
So that's fine.
He was trying to atone for
He was trying to
something that
atone
wasn't
for...
his fault.
Exactly. So he didn't do anything wrong. That's what I'm trying to say. Nowhere along the line did he do anything wrong, apart from not come clean, I suppose, with
he
his
took the
neighbour.
whiskey.
He took the whiskey. He should have just come clean and said, yeah, I was overlooking, and, on my watch, the rabbit died. Anyway, so I think you're completely
But it
forgiven.
didn't.
I know, exactly. But he didn't know that.
It's a miracle worker.
It's the Dean here. What do you say, Dean?
Yeah, I think he's a miracle worker, and I think there's no blame to be attached to anybody there. Just enjoy the whiskey. And you should have done it over the fence as well.
Well, you just come round and have a drink. Don't do it.
No, just do it over the fence. But no, it's totally forgiven. Totally forgiven.
Brother Matthew.
Here we go.
There's a couple of things to say here. Number
Here we
one,
go.
what an excellent name for a dog, Roger. I've never heard of a dog called
I
Roger.
think
What
the name was
excellent-
changed. no?
Yes, yeah. I
I don't think we did, actually. I think we
Really?
did, and then we changed it back again. But just
Oh,
Roger.
really?
Well, actually, Roger the Dodger. You see, I imagine that's
That's
where
a
it
great,
came from. I think it's-
great sounding name. Mark strikes me as being a bit thick, and indeed his entire family. If they can't work out that this rabbit wasn't stunned and didn't come back from the dead and then close the hutch door behind it, they're a bit thick. And I have no problem taking malt whiskey from people who are a bit thick. So I'm going to say, Guy, you are definitely forgiven.
Here's a very fine... yes, this is very fine. I think you're going to like this one.
Oh, okay.
I'm going to make sure I've got the right thing selected. Excellent.
Very
good. Here we go.
exciting.
Now, this one comes from Anna. We appreciate your tale. Anna, thank you very much indeed. Dear Father Simon and the novices. That's you guys.
What's me in particular?
Having recently returned from a rather damp... Oh, by the way, I did mean to say we've got a new Ready to Book Club, which you're going to announce later, just like I mentioned it, just before I got lost in this. Having recently returned from a rather damp camper van holiday to Bavaria, my mind has been cast back to other European trips, and in particular, one occasion which looms large in my memory and for which I seek forgiveness on behalf of myself and my dearly beloved partner in crime, Nick. The year is 1996 and we were enjoying the first flush of romance, in particular spending as much time travelling around on Nick's much-loved, owned from new and black Harley-Davidson with no tassels.
Woo.
This is clearly an important thing in the Harley community because no tassels is in capital letters with 3 exclamation
Really?
marks.
Wow. No tassel.
Black Harley-Davidson, no tassels, whether that's a mitigating...
What does it mean?
It means it hasn't got any tassels.
I know, I
it's a
understand
motorbike
that,
No
but
tassels
where
on
would the
it.
tassels be?
On the handlebars.
on the handlebars.
Okay,
Yeah.
just there.
Yeah.
Well, it could be
I don't know, actually. I'm just saying that.
around the seat, maybe.
That's where you would put them.
Yes.
Or the
don't
aerial.
know. He's got no tassels. If he hadn't got any, it doesn't matter where they would be. There aren't any.
All right.
No tassels. Oh, the joy and freedom of leaping on and tearing off into the sunset and the sunrise. Say no more, says Anna, and clocking up the miles to listen to our favourite bands. As a more seasoned European traveller than me, Nick decided, and I was happy to concur, that a camping adventure to France was called for, and in particular to a music and bike festival called Free Wheels, which was held every year in the Auvergne Mountains. Hawkwind, Iron Maiden, and many of our favourite bands were going to be there, and all the beer and bike ogling that one could wish for. And I was assured it would be dry, because it always is at these events. So imagine that. It sounds like a great adventure.
Yeah, no tassel.
And very important, if you turn up at this festival with tassels, you have to go in a separate field. Woo. Off we set. Tent, sleeping bags, clothes, food, gas stove, and much, much more. Anna says, strapped to the bike. Every space had something stuck onto it, and we were very, very happy. The owned from new statement about the bike earlier on became relevant a few days into our trip when, despite the fact that Nick had serviced the beloved bike thoroughly and lovingly, not to mention frequently, the exhaust became even louder than usual. Already a throaty beast, the added decibels caused by a tiny hole became a little distracting, and a roadside bodge was carried out. It was perfectly executed, however, with an empty baked bean tin to cover the offending hole and wire to hold it in place. Let me tell you, I was seriously impressed with this. What a guy. He really knew his bike with no tassels. Free Wheels, the festival, was absolutely fabulous. No rain, beer, great music, but boy were we tired. Something to do with hearing every word that every other person on the whole campfield was saying all night for 3 nights. I think that was probably to blame. Anyway, finally we had an early start, 4:30 a.m, I'll have you know. It's the ferry from Calais, which is what we had to catch. A long way to travel. We planned our journey, arriving at the campsite in good time for a good night's sleep, and okay, an early call, but what the heck? What could go wrong? Well, the thing is, we were directed to the pitches for small tents and early starters, which seemed to make sense. Most other campers had prominent UK stickers, and were obviously in a similar situation to us. Except a small group of teenagers who had created an encampment at one end of the field. Off to bed early. After another bean and sausage supper, we went straight to sleep, only to be woken at roughly 10 p.m. by hordes of drunken French teenagers playing football. They were kicking the ball indiscriminately into everyone else's tents, creating a huge hullabaloo and finding everything hilarious in a very, very noisy and unhilarious fashion. Our attempts to first appeal to their good nature and then embarrass them into just shutting up and going to sleep all failed, and they finally stumbled into silence to sleep at about 4 a.m, having kept all of the other campers up all night, giving us a total of 30 minutes slumber. I don't know how much you know about Harley exhaust pipes. It's one of the great opening...
Here we go.
It's the great opening line to a concluding paragraph. I don't know how much you know, Simon, about Harley exhaust pipes, especially ones with a hole and a bean tin bodge, but they can be very, very loud, especially if revved just right. We planned our revenge on the dastardly youths. We carefully, silently wheeled the bike so it was right in the centre of their encampment.
No.
We climbed on, and on a count of 3, Nick fired her up and revved the engine to its absolute maximum. I yelled, "Wakey, wakey, you load of Sachedistel Charles Aznavour-loving softies," at the top of my voice several times, until the tent flaps were opening and sleep-filled and terrified faces appeared. It was deafening, like this, I think. This is a Harley with no tassels, everybody.
Oh!
It's 4:30 in the morning. Yeah. Anyway, very nice. So then we drove off, feeling thoroughly pleased with ourselves. My memory seems to have provided me with a small tin tray, which I beat manically while shouting, but this can't be right. So I seek forgiveness, but not from the selfish yobs, but from the rest of the campers in the field. Actually, probably the whole of the campsite, who were woken so rudely. Anyway, ho-hum. That's Anna seeking forgiveness, but it's very good. And I think there could well be some motorbiking confessions on the way. Sister Rebecca goes first, though.
That really reminds me of the scene in Cars, you know, when Lightning McQueen goes up to those tractors and revs up his engine and they all flip over. I think it's a great wheeze, actually. I can't speak. Have you finished?
Yes.
I do feel sorry for the rest of the campsite, but I think they deserved it, and I'm sure the rest of the campsite would have been cheering because they would have been kept awake by these louts as well. So, Anna, I forgive you.
Let's see what our occasional dean makes of it all.
Yes, I forgive you as well. I think everyone would have thanked you for that, and they'd have been all right about being a little bit sleepy for the rest of the following day. It was all for the right reasons. I thought you were going to say that, in fact, you'd mistaken where these people had been camped, and it was somebody else.
No, it was genuine.
But it's absolutely
genuinely them.
Oh, in which case it was all in a good cause, yeah, and no harm done, really.
Yeah, maybe. Brother Matthew.
I'm a pretty mild-mannered guy, but if you interrupt my slumber, by thunder, I go nuts. And if someone starts kicking a ball against my tent at 3 a.m, I'm not going to be responding 2 hours later by quoting Sacha Distel or Charles Aznavour. I'm going to be grabbing the ball and sticking it firmly in La Manche and making sure they don't get any comeback whatsoever.
In La Manche?
Yes, right up the channel.
The sea.
And
That's the sleeve.
Yes, indeed. But because of the quote of Aznavour and Sacha Distel, I'm definitely going to forgive. I'd have gone far further, though.
And
Yeah.
they'd seen some good rock bands.
They had seen
as
some
well.
decent. I'll tell you what, the rock concerts in the former Eastern Bloc countries are superb.
Well, this
really
was-
good acts.
This was
Yeah.
France.
Yeah.
Yes, and also France. And
also France.
In the Far East.
What about the other campers? What about the other campers? 'Cause they would have
Well,
been
yeah,
woken
they were
up.
all probably getting on the same ferry. Everyone was on the same ferry. It was only the
fine.
French that were left, wasn't it?
Dear Father Simon, when my daughter Annie was 4 years old, she attended a lovely nursery in West Yorkshire. The staff there cared deeply for the development of their young wards and looked for new and exciting ways to help them learn and grow into responsible adults. One day, my daughter returned home from nursery gushing about a family of hamsters that had taken up residence at nursery for the children to care for. There was a mum and 5 extremely cute and fluffy babies that the children doted on. Apparently, children who were well behaved and displayed all the qualities of responsibility expected were allowed to take the family home for the weekend to care for. In the weeks that followed, Annie became a model child. Attentive, helpful, polite. In fact, just the kind of child any sensible adult would trust with a family of hamsters for the weekend. Astute confession aficionados will realise that we're into hamster territory for a confession. It's been a rich theme over the years. Unsurprisingly, her miraculous behaviour was noted by the nursery staff, and Annie was chosen as the following weekend's hamster carer. She could not have been more proud and excited. When I arrived on the Friday evening, Annie was beside herself with anticipation of this great responsibility. We carefully picked up the hamster cage with its wheel, water bottle and little pottery cottage for a bedroom and headed for the car. "Be careful, Dad," called Annie. "Put them in the front seat, not the back," in a voice that was getting just a little bossy. "Put the seatbelt round the cage," she yelled, getting into role as hamster protector just a little too enthusiastically. Eventually, after double and triple checking the hamsters were suitably arranged for the journey, we set off to the instructional monologue from Annie. It turns out that a 4-year-old hamster carer is also an expert at safe driving technique, at least in the context of hamster relocation. Anyway, on arrival home, we carefully manoeuvred the cage and its residents into the house and positioned the cage in pride of place on the coffee table in the front room. It's worth noting at this point that we lived in a 1 up, 1 down and 1 down again house. The front room was at ground level, bedrooms squeezed in upstairs and the kitchen down a set of steps in the basement. Here, I had concluded, the hamsters would be happiest because it was cool. I told Annie of my idea and, wanting to impress her with the care I was taking, carefully picked up the cage with a hand at either side. The cage was one of those plastic trays with a wire section over the top, a bit like an old-fashioned budgie cage. I gazed down through the bars of the cage into the eyes of the mother hamster. She was content, settled, and seemed genuinely grateful for the care we were showing her and for her babies. Yes, of course she
How
was.
does she know?
Turning towards the stairs down... There's trouble coming. Turning towards the stairs down to the kitchen, Annie asked if she could carry the cage down. She was extremely serious in her role as hamster protector, but this was clearly a job for an adult, and I told her so. With a hand on either side of the cage, with a flat palm pressed against the wire, I arrived at the top of the stairs and gripped the cage firmly for the descent. Oh, no. Unbeknown to me, the wire top section of the cage was attached to the plastic tray bottom by a clip on either side, which, interestingly, was operated by pushing the sides of the cage inwards. It was at this point that a series of things happened at the same time. At the exact moment the cage was positioned above the top step down to the kitchen, the pressure exerted by my hands became sufficient to detach the clips holding the plastic tray in the bottom of the cage. Standing motionless at the top of the stairs, I gazed down through the bars into the eyes of the mother as the tray detached. The tray fell as though in slow motion towards the top step containing the 6 hamsters, a small pottery cottage, and a large amount of sawdust and torn toilet roll. The mother gazed up at me for a
Oh, yeah, we're investing a lot into this, aren't we?
for a moment,
Yes.
puzzled by her sudden weightlessness.
That's exactly what was happening. Yeah, yeah. Oh, why am I so weightless? Yeah.
I stared into her diminishing eyes, still clutching the wire cage top, and then the tray hit the edge of the top step. Oh. The tiny cottage bounced down the stairs and shattered into tiny pieces.
Never mind the cottage.
I'm getting to it. The tray teetered on the top step and then slid down the stairs, carrying its hamster family downwards ever faster like the most surprised surfers of all time. Whoosh they went to the bottom. I stood motionless for a moment while Annie looked past me and simply said in a calm voice, "Dad, you've dropped the hamsters." It was then I sprang into action. Before the stunned hamsters could regain their senses and run for cover, I inverted the cage section and leapt carefully among the devastation to scoop the now squealing hamsters into the cage. Having counted the hamsters in, I reattached the plastic tray to the upturned cage. After what I'd put them through, I thought it best to leave the hamsters in the quiet and dark to recover. After a fitful night's sleep, racked with remorse, I went downstairs on Saturday morning, wondering, to be honest, how many would have made it through the night. However, to my complete surprise, all 6 hamsters were pottering around their cage as though nothing had happened. I was saved. Over the weekend, Annie and I bought a new pottery cottage for them to sleep in, replaced the sawdust and toilet roll inners. In fact, by Monday, they were a merry little hairy family again. When I dropped Annie off at the nursery, like any good father, I warned her never to speak of what had happened and concocted a story about dropping the pottery cottage while cleaning it or something. The staff were extremely grateful for me replacing the breakage, and Annie was praised for doing such a good job of looking after the hamsters. My work was done. After a rather buoyant day at work, safe in the knowledge that my secret was safe, I returned to the nursery to collect Annie. On arriving, I was approached by a staff member with a solemn face. She said she was sorry to have to tell me, but Annie had been in trouble for telling lies all day. Apparently, she had made up some story involving hamsters, the stairs, surfing, and lots of squealing. She explained that Annie had been told in no uncertain terms that lying was not acceptable. In the face of her insistence that she was telling the truth, she was told her story couldn't possibly be true because her daddy would have said so in the morning. From the corner of my eye, I stared at my shoes. I could see Annie standing across the play area, looking furious with her arms crossed, the way a 4-year-old most certainly can. I mumbled something about speaking to Annie about her behaviour and whisked her away without catching anyone's eyes. The journey home was one of tears, of me saying, well, perhaps they didn't understand, or maybe they didn't need to know all the details, that kind of thing. The matter was never discussed again, except when Annie wants to embarrass me at family meals. She is now a beautiful and clever 18-year-old woman. I would, however, like to beg the forgiveness of the collective and listeners for the distress I inadvertently caused the hamster mother and her babies in breaking their china house. I would also like to apologise to the nursery staff for withholding the detail of the weekend's events, which is not the same as lying. But most of all, I'd like to apologise to Annie for getting her in trouble at nursery and putting her through that traumatic ordeal, even if she still dines out on it. After all, she turned out okay in the end. And the hamsters were fine. Is there a problem? Maybe not. I don't know. Sister Rebecca.
I love that confession, the idea of the mother hamster gazing into his eyes.
Forlornly. Someone's watched too many Pixar.
It's a really difficult one, isn't it? First of all, actually, someone should have just told them the correct way to carry this cage. So I don't think that Michael should feel guilty about having dropped the hamsters. In a way, he should have just made a joke out of it and said, oh, I'm sorry, but I dropped the hamsters, but they're fine. That would have been a good way round it. Because obviously Annie had this, she's a very upright 4-year-old and didn't understand, the benefit of a white lie, perhaps, and was right to tell the truth. So it was a difficult one. I think he could have got out of it in a bit of a better way, just by, rather than just saying, don't tell them. So I think he should have told them, but then there was no harm done, and Annie is just making a joke of it
so
now.
So therefore,
he's forgiven.
Hamster surfer dudes, what do you think, Father
Well,
Matthew?
I have to say, at the start of every confession where a hamster's mentioned or gerbil, I always fear for them. I fear that, well, something's obviously going to happen. And the fact that they got through this one, I think we should celebrate that. But also, I think that the world is divided into those who believe that their children should lie for them and those that don't. And I'm firmly in the former camp. Frankly, you're under my roof, and whilst you're under my roof, you're going to be lying for me. And if that involves lying to your teachers, don't grass me up and tell the teachers that I sent your hamsters riding down the stairs on a tray. So for that reason, I am going to forgive, because frankly, it was Annie grassing up her dad to her teachers that caused the whole problem in the first place.
This is the confession from Jeremy. Hello, Jeremy.
What's with the this?
This is Raiden's voiceover act.
It is. In a world.
Dear Father Simon, says Jeremy, I humbly prostrate myself before the merciful collective, seeking forgiveness for... Oh, novice Nigel's in, by the way.
Good evening.
His day
this is definitely...
This is a foodie Thursday, and we need forgiveness for a crime committed as a young boy in the 1970s. My confessional story is set in a West Country village on a sunny day during the school holidays around 1975. Our garden was the place I spent most of my school holidays, climbing the apple trees, playing swing ball, or sometimes playing football with the kids from the estate over the road from our house. A fact that will become quite relevant to this story later on. My summer holiday had been passing by in the usual way. Early mornings consisting of watching the Banana Splits, Casey Jones or Skippy, that kind of thing, followed in the afternoon by bouts of frantic running around while scoffing Spangles or marathon bars. He's getting in a lot
Yes.
of 70s references. Eventually, heat stroke and the combined weight of wearing bell-bottoms and tough shoes forced a tired retreat to the kitchen, where I'd raid the freezer compartment, this being the 70s, to have a healthy glass of dandelion and burdock, which was the closest thing we had in the 70s to a fruit smoothie. Did you like dandelion and burdock? I was not a flavour for me particularly.
No, I did. I liked it. And I like it now with rum.
Yes, I love it. Yeah.
Did it have real dandelions in?
Yes, and real
Originally-
burdock, yes.
What would that be?
It's a herb.
Well, actually, it's a leafy green. Yeah, quite right.
Is it?
Yeah.
Really?
Excellent.
Right.
Very,
That was
very
a
good.
bluff.
Yeah. This is an information-rich confession. This one particular summer, inspired by the recent Olympics, I'd taken to a spot of javelin throwing to pass the time, and could often be seen hurling my javelin from one end of the garden to the other. When I say javelin, it's actually a more accurate description would be a 6-foot cane with a biro stuck on the end. Very crude, but if launched correctly, it was perfectly weighted and often flew in a perfect arc before spearing the ground at an impressive angle. One fateful day, I decided that I was going to be a big game hunter, and thus, spear or bamboo in hand, I began stalking wildebeests and lions amongst the apple trees. Emerging stealthily from the trees, I spied a lake brimming with plump fish, and I decided that as I hadn't managed to bag a lion or rampaging rhino, I would try a spot of spear fishing. It's at this point I should be clear that we didn't have a lake in our garden, let alone one brimming with plump fish. Rather, we had a small fiberglass pond that my father constructed the previous summer, and instead of brimming with plump fish, it contained a handful of emaciated goldfish swimming between numerous varieties of pondweed and water lily. However, these small details meant nothing to me with my imagination. This was a watering hole, and I resolved to spear as many fish as I could before tea time. Bamboo in hand, I stealthily approached the water's edge, and seeing my prey, I hurled my spear into the water. Well, I missed, and having failed to skewer a fish, I drew my spear out and thrust again. Still no fish. I wish in hindsight that I'd stopped here, but my frustration at failing to catch anything led to more frantic spearing as I launched the implement in the water again and again. You'll be pleased to hear that when eventually I did relent from my stabbing frenzy, I hadn't managed to catch one fish. Not a single solitary goldfish did I spear with my bamboo javelin. With a biro. So, bored with the hunter-gatherer lifestyle, I returned to the house to watch Crackerjack, Robinson Crusoe, or anything else I can think of.
70s, yeah.
And so to bed and sleep. And this, Father Simon, is where things went wrong. For I awoke the following day to hear a familiar voice in the garden, my dad, and he sounded both confused and slightly cross as he cried, "All the water's gone from the..." Oh, I don't know.
Oh, yeah.
"All the water's gone from the pond and the goldfish are all dead." Gingerly, I rose from my bed and looked out of my bedroom window at the scene below.
Oops.
Reaching down into the pond, my father was retrieving the lifeless goldfish from the empty pond at the bottom of which were small black puncture holes, lots of them amongst rather sorry-looking and wilting water lilies. "Someone's punctured holes in the fiberglass pond liner," he exclaimed pompously.
Yeah.
Who would do such a thing?
Yeah.
Well, who indeed? It's at this point that I thought I should do the decent thing and explain clearly what had happened, that I should man up and with a stiff upper lip confess my crime and take the consequences. After all, even the pond had taken my dad many long hours to construct and cost a pretty penny. He was bound to understand my innocent mistake, and thus I found myself exclaiming out loud, "It was the kids from the estate! They did it in the night! I saw them!" Now, I appreciate that with that statement I've done myself no favours in the eyes of the confessional collective. What a moral superior bunch they are.
But love it, yes.
But I was actually quite proud of my ingenuity at the time, if a little guilty about loading the blame on the kids from the other side of the tracks, who regularly played in my garden, and thus a rather fruitless investigation was initiated in the quiet village in which we lived, and there was much shaking of heads in the village shop at the mindless vandalism at the kids. Luckily, my fears that the Sweeney, or the professionals, would be brought in to expose my crime proved unfounded, and my dad's anger eventually subsided, and my friends from across the tracks were eventually allowed back into the garden once more, but they may have been made to feel a little uneasy by the glaring of my dad. To this day, my dad has never known the truth, and this is me telling him for the first time that it wasn't those kids over there, it was the kid upstairs, i.e. your son. So I ask forgiveness not just for the murderous attack on Goldie and his fishy chums, but also for diverting the blame onto the innocent lads from that estate across the road. I beg forgiveness for my poor old dad, who long laboured in his building and his pond, and all the work was undone by a bored son with an overactive imagination. But I need your forgiveness. How say you, collective? What do we say to Jeremy, Sister Rebecca?
Well, I think he was quite clever because he could have blamed one person and instead he blamed a group of people. And as we know as journalists, you can't libel a group unless they're identifiable as individuals.
Oh, right. Very impressive.
Is that right?
We do now.
Like that.
So if he'd said it was Bob from across the road,
then that would have been really bad. And the kids were invited back eventually, weren't they? So no harm done in that respect. I do feel sorry for the goldfish and for the dad who had worked so hard to build the pond. Yeah. But he didn't know, it was a mistake, wasn't it? He didn't know that was going to happen.
No, he didn't.
So I think I'm going to forgive you, Jeremy.
Novice Nigel.
There is always a moment in all of these when you could just say something and just, as we'd say, man up on this occasion with it being a fella. And I would have felt a lot better if he'd eaten the goldfish, because carp, actually, we don't eat them in Britain, but carp are very tasty, very popular in Poland, particularly the big ones. But
bear that in mind,
all the coarse fishermen were going, no, put them back, let them grow big. Anyway, but he didn't, and I do understand how he felt, and they all came back, and as you say, he didn't libel an individual. Jeremy, West Country's finest, you are forgiven.
Oh, okay, fair enough.
Yeah. Obviously, it's going to fall to me to say just because he's not libelling them doesn't mean that it's all right. This is clearly a class war, and I'm going to very much come out on the side of the kids on the other side of the tracks from the estate who have been maligned by Rupert and Jeremy, probably as a Tristram and his spear of biro. And here's what I'm going to say as well. I don't buy the fact that he didn't know that he pierced this fiberglass bottom of the pond. He knew fine well that he was piercing it and that the water was going to drain away and that he was going to kill those goldfish. So I am not going to forgive, because you knew what you were doing, Rupert, and your biro of
Jeremy.
Death.
Everybody's a bit thick, maybe.
Jeremy,
yeah,
yes.
Rupert's friend.
They were this week's confessions. We know that you've got a couple tucked away. I think it's the summer of '82, if I remember right. Anyway, send yours, please. Confessions at BBC. It was the woman next door. Confessions at bbc.co.uk. More gems for you next week. Don't forget to download the Weekly Mayo while you're at it. Thank you.